Welcome to Religion in the American Experience, a podcast that explores how religion has shaped America and how America has shaped religion, which can help us as we wrestle with complex questions of American governance and purpose in the 21st century. Here's your host, Chris Stevenson.
Welcome to another episode of The Making of U.S, Lived Religion in America, a subseries of the podcast Religion in the American Experience. In this subseries, we explore the role religion has played in the lives of everyday Americans, reminding us that while religion exerts an important and large influence on the events and movements of the American project, religion's primary work is in the everyday lives of adherents. Listening to the lived religious experiences of others will make each of us more effective stewards of religion's role in the American experiment in self-government. Today, we will be speaking with Matt Nowakowski of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Matt, thank you so much.
It's great to be here, Chris. Thanks for the invite.
Matt, please tell us a little bit about yourself, leaving out anything religious as we will get to that later. Help our listeners get to know you a bit.
Sure. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am an unabetted Packers fan, Brewers fan, and all things outdoors in Wisconsin, especially fishing and gardening. My passion is growing roses. I went to a mix of public and private universities for bachelor's, master's, and doctoral studies. I spent 10 years in corporate America doing infrared and Raman spectroscopy, and then 16 years as faculty and then administration in a private Lasallian Catholic university. I, small r, retired 4 years ago and still do some work as the managing editor of Access, the Journal of Lasallian Higher Education, and work as a master gardener here in Minnesota.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. You have a family?
I have a family, my wife, Christine, and my daughter, Veronica, who just finished her master's degree.
Okay, what's her master's in?
Her master's is in public policy. She was out at UC Berkeley, living the California life for 2 years and decided she really missed Minnesota and has moved home here to the Midwest. She's not a Packer fan. She's a Viking fan.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Excellent. So, Matt, describe for us who your parents and grandparents were religiously. What are their religious histories?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a real formation question for me. Milwaukee, where both my sets of grandparents immigrated to in the early 20th century, was organized into ethnic neighborhoods based on where folks came from. So in my case, my grandparents came from what was then Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Hungary. And so for many immigrants from Eastern Europe, church was the place to get together with their community, their neighbors. Often church was celebrated in their native tongue, so they went to mass in Slovak or Polish or Hungarian. And it was a way that they kept social connections. It's a way that they heard news from home. And so they took, their kids, my parents, who went with them. And right around that period of 1950s, when my parents were graduating high school, there was a real switch in these communities that said, to be successful in America, you need to understand English and you need to be assimilated well into the English practices. And so we all started going to my grandparents' church, but going to the English masses. And so they thought that that was important for us to do well versus hearing mass or practicing religion or spirituality in Slovak or Polish or in High Latin, which was, part of the genre of the day. Ultimately, though, the family decided it was a very powerful maternal grandmother, Veronica, who my daughter is named after. We attended mass with her 7:30 in the morning, and it was an English service in a Catholic church.
Okay. So did you know your grandparents?
Very well, yes.
Okay. And what were they, describe to us their religious lives, if you could.
Yeah,
What you know of it.
Yeah, from what I understand, and I'm looking back now, 50 plus years ago, they went to church every day. My grandmother, walked to church. They prayed. She attended English mass, but her Bible and her prayer book were in Slovak. She loved it when the grandkids came and sat with her. But as I'll get to in some of the later in this discussion, discipline and seriousness, and I'll say the word gravity were important, to respect the traditions, the stability of the church, and to respect the community that you were a part of. So it was a everyday sort of interaction, religiously with them, and it was really centered to their lives. I should also say they volunteered at the church. So, like, my grandfather, her husband, my grandma Veronica's husband, he was a carpenter, so he did work for the church. My father was a steam fitter, so I mean, he put the boiler and furnace systems in the church, and so it was very much a lived kind of community experience.
Okay. And did you ever attend mass, a foreign language mass with them,
Um,
or was it all
generally,
English?
generally no. English, unless it was a high day like Easter, or maybe even a Christmas day type or Christmas Eve mass where we went to hear it in Latin. And they understood it. My parents understood it. I understood a little of it. But it was still nice to see, as they say in the church, the smells and bells of the very formal, kind of high days.
Okay. So both your mother's parents and your father's parents were Catholic, very active.
Yes.
Went to mass every day.
Yes.
Okay. And that obviously, for a small child, would be influential on you, just sort of by osmosis. What about your parents, your mother and your father? What was their what was their religious life like when they were young and growing up, and then got
Yeah,
married?
it's interesting, now both my parents have passed, and that there's those questions you wish you would have asked that you didn't think to ask at the time. And I didn't know, and we never talked about when they were little, other than, I realized how strong a presence the church was in my grandparents' lives. So my assumption is they went along because they were supposed to. In
Right.
the way that me and my sister and my two brothers, we went along. And at 7 o'clock every Sunday morning, we were in the back of my parents' Chrysler on the way across town to get to essentially the Slovak church where my grandmother would be. And so I think they learned that sort of lived reality, and mimicked what their parents did.
Yeah. Okay. So they were just as religious as the previous generation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Anything else about your parents, your grandparents that you want to say before we move on to your lived religious experience?
I would say one real great gift that they gave all of us, my siblings and I, was that they encouraged us to follow the rules, but to ask lots of questions. And I remember my mom specifically saying, there's no such thing as, asking a question you shouldn't ask. And so they were very inquisitive and very much. I would learn about this later, like as a doctoral student when I was studying the framework of what we call discernment. They were very supportive of this sort of individual discernment for you to figure out your own spirituality, not to just go along and to get along sort of thing. They wanted us to actually think about it.
Right.
So, kudos to them. I didn't always know when I was, little or even in high school, like what was going on and like how sophisticated they were. You figured that, like probably a lot of people, you figure that out when you get older.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. Okay. So let's talk about in what ways religion influenced you during your elementary school years.
Yeah. I think, on the social side, it gives you a calendar. You learn, yes, the social calendar of things like Christmas and Easter, or festivities within the church, but you also learn the liturgical calendar, and the sacraments, and like that type of education, which kind of gives you a foundation to ask good questions, which I think good religion does, is that it gives you that sort of sphere and background to be able to ask those tough questions about your own spirituality, and kind of like how you are going to grow and what your own path is. So I would say for me growing up in elementary school and even into high school, it was about learning the structures and the norms and the accepted practices, and then pushing on those and asking questions. And that, as I just, kind of alluded to, was incredibly valuable for the way I learn, because that was very helpful to me to ask more questions and to probably be inquisitive even later in my life. And, clearly here I am. I've had a whole career where I spent almost 2 decades working for the Brothers of the Christian Schools, and I'm still asking questions. And I find great joy in editing, religious works and spiritual articles. And I think that started back at this time.
And is this approach to religious parenting where you encourage your children to ask lots of questions while at the same time you as a parent are going to be faithful in the way you feel important and encourage your children to do that, but also to question? Is that widespread as far as you know? Like growing up, did your
Yeah.
friends in church have that same experience with their parents, or were there some who felt really they didn't feel that?
Yeah, I would say that the latter. I would say some friends, felt like, this was the way, kind of like black and white, very much, this is, and these are the rules to follow and all that. And that pushing back or looking at the shades of gray, that wasn't as accepted by some parents versus
Mm.
others. And I would really encourage anyone who's listening to this that um letting people grow in their own spirituality, letting people understand how their own faith is lived out is so important, especially when young people are going through, let's face it, middle school and high school. You go through a lot of changes and a lot of challenges. And that not feeling too cloistered or too restricted, I think can be really beneficial within limits.
Sure. Okay. Um, any, what did your religious life look like as an elementary school student? Like, give us a week in the life, a week in the
Yeah.
religious life of Matt Nowakowski as an elementary school student, if you can
So yeah,
remember.
yeah, from whatever. So Sundays were the big day where we got to go and I got to. I'm the youngest. I'm the baby, so I got to sit next to the grandmother. So that was super cool. And she snuck me butterscotch candies and that whole thing within church, which made it going to church fun. And I really liked seeing her. I liked seeing my aunts. That kind of thing. Um, I was the last of my family, the baby. So I actually went to public grade school. So I didn't have the sort of structured going to the church at the school at the church, because for my three older siblings, they had that, but that school closed
Mm.
because of budgets and all that was happening in the 1970s in churches in Milwaukee. So I went to a public school. So I had to essentially learn through what they called at that time CCD, or Christian education. And so we had regular meetings during the week to do things like First Communion, or when
Okay.
you were getting your more formal education. And so that was kind of an add-on. I will say the church in Milwaukee was pretty smart about how they did that, because they realized that a number of my generation were going to go out to the public schools and they weren't going to be at the school at the church. So they made that experience, fun and social, and like you wanted to do it.
Right. Okay. And obviously, church every Sunday. Um, anything on a daily basis religiously.
So for me, as in like in grade school and
Right.
specifically in high school, these were public institutions that didn't pray at the beginning of class. And so if you did, it was on a very sort of like personal level.
Right.
And as the saying goes, for any of us who have ever taught calculus, anyone who says there's no prayer in schools has never taken a good differential equation class, because there's always prayer in differential equations. Or if you study botany and you have to figure out why roses aren't blooming, there's always prayer in botany. But it's much more of an internal thing. It's not community type prayer like you might experience in um, a mission driven or
Right.
faith driven school.
Right.
Yeah.
But at home, things on a daily basis as a youngster,
We're
religious.
very personal.
Okay.
So you could take that time by yourself. And again, that where I give kudos to my parents, where they let us really discern about what that was going to look like,
Okay.
whether it was meditation, whether it was prayer, whether it was fishing, however you
Right.
pursued the spiritual, they supported us to do that.
Perfect. Okay. Let's move into middle and high school. You mentioned
Yeah.
mentioned that already, but anything more? W- Do you remember religious influences in those years that you
Yeah.
haven't mentioned yet?
I would say the big thing, and maybe this might hit with some of the listeners, especially in high school when you're trying to make big decisions like, where should I go to college, or what major should I pursue, or, should I join the military, or this or that. That for me, in my memory, is like one of the first times like, whoa, I really need to think this through, and I really need to pray about it and figure out what is the right direction for me.
Okay.
And so that is when I discovered some wonderful things about church that I didn't know as a little kid, that you can go in, like doors are open. And when you need that time to like really sit and think deeply and reflect about something, there are opportunities to do that. And I don't know if it's part of just maturing or part of it was I was looking for it later in life, but that became a normal practice where for me, as a high school student, I would go 20 minutes early, 30 minutes early, so I could have that time of personal prayer to think about what was going on and what I wanted to think about.
So 20 or 30 minutes early before church on Sunday?
Correct.
Okay. Well, that's neat. Thanks for sharing that. Sounds like you were spiritually mature. What about any opportunities at church as a teenager? Official duties or youth groups? What sort of anything there?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. So one of the coolest things I got to do, I play trombone, and so I got involved in the music ministry, and so I played at church, and then occasionally, there would be, big sort of things within the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And I remember I got to play with a group from Honors Orchestra at the installation of a new bishop. And that was one of the things I like really, I think I was 17 years old. And I remember being in like the cathedral downtown and seeing the big shepherd's crook and the whole procession and all that formal stuff and playing my trombone. And so being part of music ministry was a really cool way to be involved and to see a different side of the church that you might not get
Sure.
just if you would not be involved in music.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So you were in the music ministry. Did you all have weekly youth groups, or was the youth group important part of your religious uh, influence there as a teenager?
It wasn't other than the formal training classes we had.
Okay.
Really, I was one of those people that I guess, again, getting back to my parents, I kind of pursued it on an individual basis. And so, I never reached out, and maybe it's my introverted nature. I wouldn't go away. I mean, my friends would go away on youth retreats and that kind of thing. That isn't what I felt drawn to.
Okay.
Um, Playing trombone, yep, I felt drawn to that. Beautiful
Yeah.
church music. Christmas is the best. I mean, we got great stuff. Um, Personal reflection, I felt very drawn to that. And then, even into my college years when I would start studying martial arts and I would learn about Zen meditation, I was like, that really tracked with kind of how I'm wired.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great segue. Now, let's talk about the role of religion in your life after leaving home and going
Yeah.
to school. It sounds like you went to college.
Yep.
Um, this is a time in many young people's lives where whatever they learned and grew up with religiously was called into question. Not everybody, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
obviously it's a big part of people's lives at this juncture, high school to military, trade school, college. How did religion influence you in this time of transition, in this big time of making important choices and entering into adulthood?
This was so fun to write. So I've been thinking about this question. I I had this experience of what it offered me was stability. And so when I went to a college that was on a different part of the state than where my parents lived. So I was on my own. And what I found myself seeking out was I found a church not unlike the one I'd been attending with my grandparents and them forever. And I found it very comforting. Um, I decided to branch out and I went to evening mass for the first time. to kind of be a rebel, and to go get away from the 7:30 in the morning. I think it lasted about 2 months, and I couldn't take it, and I went back to going at 7 in the morning. And okay, this is a kind of like a funny thing that my wife likes to tease me about. I'm very picky about the where I sit. I like consistency, so I wrote down the word pew stability. She says I have great pew stability, and so I found myself, and I found now even as an adult when we have moved places in the United States or whatever, I like to find that favorite place where the acoustics feel right. I like the artwork. I don't know. There's probably 1,000 variables involved in that choice. So what I found myself doing, to your question, is kind of going back and building on that foundation that had been established and finding those routines that did offer me a lot of stability. And so even when I kind of like pushed out, I found, what worked for me was really what I was trained in and what I had grown up with.
Yeah. Okay. So you took your religious upbringing right into college, kept it all. Was
Yep.
that, I guess, joined a church? I don't know if you had to join, but went to a Catholic church there,
Yep. Yep.
active,
Yep.
weekly mass.
Yep. Yep.
Um, other, did you participate in other ways? Were you in the music ministry in
I,
college there?
I still play trombone and like that. I think, because all those change, you're going through a lot, especially when you're doing undergraduate and you're living by yourself and you're in a dorm. That offered, that type of stability in routine that I found incredibly comforting. And knowing the church liturgical schedule and sort of like organizing my life to fit around that gave me that sense of stability as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I, I I do know that some Catholics feel they need to go to mass every day if they
Yeah.
can.
Yep.
This was not your experience growing up. Never has
No.
been.
No, it was, and actually, that is one question I asked my mom, because it was very clear her mother was going every day
Right.
and
I remember you said that. Yeah.
yeah, and very serious about it, very and stoic and all that, and she was, a very progressive thinker, and she's like, well, Matt, don't go just because we tell you to go. You got to find your own way. And I remember her telling me that. And for me, that kind of opened the doors to like really grow my own sort of spiritual practice about how I was going to experience church. And again, kudos to my parents for being that open to, say like, okay, this was my experience, this was my parents' experience, but you need to find your experience.
So maybe you can pause here for a second. The what are the instructions regarding attending mass? Are there official instructions you should go every day if you can, or it doesn't matter, you should go at least once a week? And then and tell us how your parents went from daily mass upbringing, it sounds like, to
Yeah.
daily, and then you were comfortable. I'm sorry, to weekly, and then you were also comfortable with weekly.
Yeah, I mean the real sort of dicta back then in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee was for sure Sunday was a yes,
Okay.
and then highly encouraged every day.
Okay.
And I think there's a point to add here. I mean, my folks were first generation, and I was a first generation college student, and my dad was a steam fitter, so very blue collar job, and like they worked hard. And so I think just by the nature of how their life was organized, I remember him leaving the house for job sites at, early 30, 6 in the morning plus, and not coming home until, we're all back from school. And like that
Yeah.
was the lived reality. And my mom had, four of us to take care of and a job at the bank. So I think just the lived reality of what growing up in that era and being first generation students, that's how we rolled. And I
Yeah.
think that was just the lived reality of it.
Right. Okay. And it sounds like it's okay from a theological standpoint. If
Yeah.
you can't go every day, go weekly. By the way,
Yeah.
do, do you consider your mom and your dad equally spiritual, or was one more religious and spiritual than the other?
That's a great question. I would consider them equal but different.
Okay.
Um, my father was very doctrinally aware. So if someone and he had gone to Catholic school and Catholic grade school and Catholic, all the way up. And so if someone had like the question you just asked about, so what's the rule about, church attendance, he would know it.
Okay.
And was that. My mother was, I would call her incredibly well read and very much a practitioner of spirituality. And so she was um, deeply religious, but less doctrinally religious.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Understood. Let's see. Anything else you want to say about religion in college and grad school? Its
Uh,
influence.
Not well, yeah. One thing in my doctoral studies, I went, and this is where I meet the brothers of the Christian schools, the Lasallian brothers, for my doctorate.
And this
I
is
was
later in life.
This is
For
later in life, yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
I was probably late 30s when I came back from my doctorate. Um, and so when I met them and went to one of their schools, and as a doctoral student, you're really encouraged to think and to read and to question. And I got to go to a number of retreats. So I did get to go to the retreats, but much later in life, with the brothers. And I pretty much kind of had a almost a second awakening of what I had experienced as a high school student of discernment, of ask questions, find your path, find the way of how your spirituality is lived out in the world. And the brothers do an amazing job of teaching about that, in teaching the methods of St. John Baptist de La Salle, which is that, God is present among us and you need to, follow that path that has for you. And so finding that in your doctor, when of course you have all that stuff going on and you're reading and you're writing an original work, that was very influential to me and very influential into what I would pick to do for the next 20 years of my life.
Okay. All right. So let's go back from before your doctorate, post college life. Uh,
Yep.
I know you got married, you had a child,
Yep.
you worked, you went back to school. What's been the role of religion in your life post college? If you can give us sort of an overview of those decades.
Yeah. I would say significant in that. Well, it started when I first got my corporate job. It was a lot of travel. I would say my wife would know for sure, but it was like about 90% of the time I was on an airplane, at least
Wow.
once a week. So with that, I was all over the world, and I was in 11 countries and I think 37 states. Um, and so when I was somewhere on a Sunday, it gave me an opportunity to go out and look at churches and experience churches in different places in the world,
Yeah.
everywhere from Tokyo to Manila, um, to Helsinki. So went to some gorgeous churches in Germany, and so it was almost a sort of awakening of looking at how big this tapestry of what we call church is, because I got to go experience church and religion in different countries, and so that I think was incredibly influencing on the professor I became when I started to teach. And I was very fortunate. I taught master's and doctoral students who came from all over the world. And so my sort of approach to teaching then had been really influenced by that travel and that experience of religion outside of the United States.
Yeah. And you remained a faithful weekly mass attending Catholic?
I did.
Okay.
I know it might sound incredibly boring,
No, no, no,
but
not at all. I
I
just wanted to confirm
yeah,
church, Catholic Church remains central in your life
yeah.
um, through all that.
It's that sort of pillar of stability, that no matter where you are, um, even just 2 years ago, I was in Rome for the brothers, and I attended some masses, and they were all in Italian, and I don't speak Italian, but I find the masses gorgeous, and I still know enough that I could follow along.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I encourage anybody who gets the experience, regardless of what religion you are, to go have that experience of listening and experiencing those services in a different language, because it is a different experience and a great
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Um, Role of religion in your uh, family life. So in your marriage and with rearing a child.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So that, that's one of the things that Chris and I, my wife, we really agreed on. She's also from Milwaukee, and if she was on this call, she would be saying very similar things to what I'm saying. Um, and so when we had a daughter, we knew that very much that ability to have stability and consistency that kind of religious education offers, but also kudos again to my mom, that idea of pushing our daughter to discernment, to figure out what she wants to do, who she wants to be, how she's going to experience it. Okay, super fun dad moment I'll share.
Please.
When she was out at UC Berkeley, graduate student, she was TAing a class, 1,050 things going on. Of course you're concerned about your kid because they're across the country and all that. She emails us and says, hey, she's saying she has and she joined the church choir. She found this great church that she really likes, and it was like excellent. My mother would be so happy right now. Anybody who's ever had that experience, right? Where, I mean, that wasn't on us. That was her making the decision to be part of that.
Right.
And so that to me is where that sort of discerning education is so important.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Before we get to the last question,
Yeah.
anything else you want to say about religion's influence on you that we haven't covered? Any specific memories or stories or important events that would
Yeah,
help
I'll
us?
say this, because I had so many international students and students, I had a number of students from West Africa and East Africa that had seen a lot of poverty and a lot of war. And when they come into your classroom, they're bringing a lot. And so I think one of the things I will say just about a spiritual approach to being with students is it's incredibly important to be able to listen and really hear where they're coming from and what their own personal experiences are. And like that sort of mission of accompaniment, which I'll talk about in the last part of this, has been critical and probably my deepest and richest learning, being part of the Lasallian Institute and working with the brothers, is that our role is a role of accompaniment, to care for others. And listening is one of the greatest gifts that you can offer. And as Mother Teresa says, being kind is free. And listening and being kind is so, so important in today's world.
Absolutely. Okay, last question. Matt, if someone were to ask you how religion has shaped you, and you had maybe 1 or 2 minutes to answer that, what would you say?
Yeah. I would say the brothers have this wonderful way of starting their prayer services, and they say, "Let us remember we are in the holy presence of God." And you pause, and if you understand this French in the 17th century, the presence of God isn't an abstract concept. This is a lived presence, a lived practice that God is with you. And this has given me great peace standing, whether I'm editing a journal article, attempting to figure out how to get a certain rose to bloom, or doing anything in my academic life, that remembrance in the holy presence of God is kind of the centerpiece of everything.
Okay, Matt, thank you. You have the last word. We have been talking with Matt Nowakowski of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Thank you so much, Matt, for giving us of your time and sharing how religion has shaped and influenced you and your life. It has been super.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Religion in the American Experience is produced by the private Digital First National Museum of American Religion. Scholarly support is provided by Dr. Lauren Turek and audio and video assistance by Dr. Randall Stevens. The music was composed by Evan Chamberlain.